obviously, this is the appropriate commission to have a public hearing, which has begun today. And again, because there's no changes in the site, probably the commission wouldn't necessarily require a site plan, although we do have a map showing the interior changes and some of the window changes and things like that. So you do have quite a bit of information there. As far as the need for this use, Fred kind of had this in his mind when he built the house some 28 years ago, that he may want to have a family member move in with him, and he be in an accessory apartment, and that's the plan. Again, the commission, not only in 6.13, but also in 5.2, takes a look at any changes in the character of the neighborhood. And again, there's going to be no changes in terms of what the neighbors are going to see, because again, no changes to the exterior. Not going to be any parking lots added or anything like that. There's already existing driveway. It's already hooked up to public water. And again, like I said, there's going to be no separate metering. It's going to be all the same metering that's been required. Also, actually, I should have mentioned in 6.13, this part of the house has always had access to the main part of the house, so that's going to continue. That's an interior stairwell, which is shown on the map. There's not going to be any signage. It's just it's going to be for Fred and his family members to live there. So I really think that when the commission looks at what's proposed, at the regulations, both section 6.13 under the accessory apartment rules, and of course 5.2, which governs your special permit rules, I think you're going to see that this application squarely fits within all of your regulations. And we would ask you to consider and approve it. And I don't know if, Fred, did you want to add anything?
No. Okay, good. Mr. Planner, did you see any problems with it meeting the requirements of both those sections?
No, I don't see any problem with it. As Attorney Kelly listed, it complies with all of the requirements of your regulation, and the 6.13 and under 5.2, it's not going to have any impact on the neighborhood. So I don't see any problem with it.
Before I open it to the public, any commissioner comments or questions?
Yeah, was there a larger map? Because it's hard to tell the square footages here, and did you add up the square footages?
Oh, yes, they gave us a full-size map.
Full-size map?
Yep.
Could the applicant, for the commissioners, show what modifications he's going to make to the plan as far as a window or door? And the other thing I wanted to find out, if the applicant's going to comply with 6.13.8. I didn't see an affidavit with this application.
Right. Normally, we get that afterwards. In fact, the commission, a number of years ago, the commission...
Commissioner Payne, actually, I have it right here for you. So I can pass it. I have the original and plenty of copies for the commission. But, yes, thank you for noting that. And, Fred, if you want to just quickly talk about... Yeah. Would you like to see a bigger version of the map, Commissioner Payne?
No, I just would like to know where the modifications are happening, if they could show us.
On the north end, we're going to take out one window and put a door there. That's the only modification.
And that would be to the rear of the property?
Yeah, it's the rear of the property. Okay. Yeah.
There's already 4 doors there. We're just going to be adding one.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commission comments? Okay, we're going to open up to the public, so...
Let me get these, pass those down. And if you'd pass the original, Commissioner Braverman to the planner.
Okay, please indicate so we could ask them.
Yep. We'll get our stuff out of here so the public can come up.
Okay, anyone from the public wishing to speak in favor of this application, please come forward, state your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone in opposition to this application? Commissioner, what would you like to do at this point? I would like to move it to old business and act on it tonight.
Move that we move this petition, old business, for tonight.
Second.
Okay, motion made and second. Any questions, comments? The planner will have a draft motion for us. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll be taking it up under old business so you could get going.
Thank you.
Okay, that ends the public portion of the minutes of the meeting. We'll have the next item is approval of minutes, December.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Second, any changes, additions, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? New business, we're under new business section, zoning, text amendment, motor vehicle regulations. Mr. Planner.
Mr. Chairman, for the same reasons stated at the previous meetings, I'm going to recuse myself from this, but I would also like to say that there was some questions brought up about other distance requirements and stuff. I don't want to recuse myself from any discussion on that. Thank you.
Okay, just, if we talk about it, make yourself available. Okay, Mr. Planner, you have a memorandum. Right. I have, you want to just go over it quickly, because I have some questions.
Okay, sure. Okay, as I said in the memo, at the last TPZ meeting, the commission discussed what used to be allowed back before the regs were amended in 2007. We discussed gas stations, car dealerships, oil, tire, and brake shops, car washes, and car and truck rentals. And these uses were all allowed by special permit in a variety of zones. And what the commission felt was that they wanted to go back to allowing these uses in those same zones under those same circumstances, namely by special permit.
Okay, I have a question on that. That does not pertain to what we're doing as far as the regulations, because we're only regulating DM, motor vehicle department, auto uses, correct?
These are all regulated by
Car washes, that's not a regulated use by the motor vehicle department.
right, but it's prohibited currently under your regulations, and it used to be allowed under your regulations. So that's why it's on the list of uses that you are discussing reinstating.
Okay. Any questions on that from the commissioners?
So what, just that?
Yeah, just that item,
Just the car wash item?
yeah. Or go ahead, and if you have other questions, to ask the planner.
Number 5 on page 2, adult-oriented establishment.
Okay,
Distance requirements that, why don't we go through before we get into the second page, let's go through the rest of what's going on the first page here as far as the buffer zone.
Yeah, but that's a distance requirement, right?
Right, but let's be specific for this, so Dominic could get in on the distance requirements on these other items. It's not part of the auto regulation. You understand? Now, Dominic would like to participate in the distance requirements for things other than auto-related uses, which he has the right to do. So if we limit ourselves to, at this point, to just talking about the distance requirement for the auto, we get into the remainder, like the adult establishments and the heliports, he will be able to participate.
So would we need to talk about item number 1 on page 2 also, because it has to do with motor vehicle activities? would that coincide with talking about the
Yes.
first paragraph that you're speaking of
Yes.
below the chart?
Yes,
So anything below number 1, we will take up after.
Right.
Because they're not specific to auto-related uses, correct?
right.
Okay.
Do commissioners understand that, what I'm trying to accomplish? Okay. I have a question for the planner. And I need an explanation of, it says here, under the chart, the only new regulation TPC wants to keep are the prohibited, overhead service doors facing the street and 100-foot buffer between motor vehicle activities and residence zone, which is only 50 feet, which was only 50 feet in 2007. Be advised that the town attorney has recommended going back to the original 50-foot buffer. Is there an explanation as why he feels we should go back to the 50-foot? So I'm looking to increase to 100 feet.
Right. He's here tonight, but I'll go on a limb and suggest that he's recommending we stay with the original 50 to minimize the differences between 2007 and today, to turn the clock back completely to 2007 and not keep a little bit of what new rules have crept in the past decade. But he can speak, he's here, so if you want him to speak to that item, he's
Well,
present.
I think it's important because I'm looking to increase the buffer, and I don't think that if there's not a real legal reason why we should go back to the 50-foot, I want to make changes to this regulation. You want to come forward, Ben? Anthony?
Mike, I'll hear that, but I want to then piggy off what you're asking.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the whole goal is to try to achieve conformity. And I was hoping that going back to the 2007 starting point would allow us to try to reach conformity with as many businesses as possible. I'm going to try to be I'm not trying to be obtuse here, but we have pending litigation, and some of the things that I need to say really should be said in executive session.
Okay, well, we have an executive session, so we'll discuss it in the executive session later on. But we need an explanation because I'm looking to, I want to go back to the 2007, but I want to do it with that's my opinion. We'll have other opinions from other commissioners, but I'd like to see us be able to not just go back, but go back and if we could improve or correct some things, I'd like to be able to do that.
I understand that.
And unfortunately, no matter what we do, there's going to be some businesses that are not going to be able to conform. That's just the nature of the beast. That's the way it works.
I agree.
So we try to minimize the best we can, but while we're making these changes to the regulation, I'd like to be able to make it so that when we're finished, we have a regulation that we can live with.
Right,
And
I
that we
agree.
protect the rest of the, the rest of the community from our actions.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll discuss it in
All right.
executive session.
Thank you.
That particular item. Okay, Commissioner Claffey, and then Commissioner Fox.
And if, stop me if this goes into what we may discuss. I still have the concern over the overhead doors in existing structures that have, that come into play in the chart. Like, and I brought it up before, I'll use them, is the Enterprise that originally was not in the chart when they were on the Burger King side of the Berlin Turnpike, because the service or wherever they cleaned the cars was in the back of the property, and I think it faced the woods, and if there was any residential there, it was well up the hill. But now, since they have moved across the street and they occupied that, which used to be the stereo shop, I think, which has a rear garage door that they pull the cars in now to clean. And I've never pulled a measurement of how close it is to the residential street. I think that's Brockett there would be the Kitts, well, Kitts.
It abuts the residential piece
So-
of property.
my point is, say that business, it definitely got bigger from when it went from one site, now moved across the street, got even bigger with the square footage of the building. They have more cars out front, they use the door. Will these changes make those structures more not in compliance when we're trying to kind of clean up? So we don't have other properties, when we change a rule, come out of like more, what's the word, more,
Compliant?
yeah, like not, if you change the law and change the
More non-conforming.
more non-conforming, excuse me,
Right.
yes, thank you. It does, I mean, I'm just, that bottom paragraph kind of,
Well, the example you gave that wouldn't meet any criteria because it abuts a residence zone, so it doesn't meet any distance requirements.
Well, but it's the overhead door that he's talking about.
I'm
not the
saying,
use,
yes.
it's not the use, because the actual entrance for the general public.
Yeah, well,
you're
let me-
saying for Brockett Street, yeah.
Okay, so let me speak to that. That's a good point. I wasn't aware of enterprise. So yes, if you retain the prohibition on overhead doors for automotive uses, that would then make enterprise non-conforming with regard to the door.
But would still allow them to operate,
Yes,
because that's where it's, a lot of these, and I think we've discussed this in the past, and you brought it up, there's a lot of vacant land that had, say, an oil or tire brake facility or a gas station on it. And it seems like, how would this impact those nonconformities, or to go from legal now to nonconformity after?
well, since.
In newer term, even though they're still grandfathered.
Right, since every auto business, related business other than enterprise, which I wasn't aware of until you brought it to my attention, since any other places in Newington that have overhead doors, they had them from way before, so they will always be grandfathered.
Okay.
Okay, it's only ones that have come in since 2011, well, they would also be grandfathered because, such as enterprise, because there were, at one time, they were allowed to do that. So they would be allowed to continue to operate. They wouldn't be allowed to add any new ones. Well, no, on second thought, wait, let me back up. So how is it that enterprise has an overhead door to begin with?
It was in that original building that just kind of always changed.
Right, but
Kinda keep-
the CEO wouldn't have let them move in.
Well,
That
All right,
came
I'll have to look into
came-
that one.
You better
It's-
look into it because that came to this commission and it was an approval.
I'm using that as an example because I just want, as you look down the pike with some vacant structures and this pending litigation that every developer probably knows about that is looking at that strip to do work, I just don't want to take vacant pieces of land that then kind of ex-nays them in a development standpoint for future growth for our town with going, which this might go into executive, but
Well, but you're right. That would, this rule, if it's kept, would prohibit businesses from having overhead doors facing the street, auto-related businesses.
no, and I know there were some, before my time, there was the Monroe, they changed the facing to try to minimize that, which is great, but you still see it. But I just
So the
wanna-
question the commissioners need to ask themselves is balance the aesthetics off the economic development.
No, and that's, I mean, has that been thought of by you guys to
Oh, well,
help
we
us?
certainly, obviously, it's not for us to tell you what's aesthetically important, because that's
No,
your,
I'm more
that's
of
your
the,
decision.
more of, I don't want vacant lots or possible occupancy changes to come before us that can now not if we make these changes.
Yeah, you're right. A vacant building which has an overhead door on the Berlin Turnpike would not be able to be occupied by an auto-related use if the regulation change as we're discussing it goes forward.
With that said, how is that with what the pending litigation, if we need to talk about that in executive? That's where I think, I personally wouldn't want this,
Okay, I'll tell you, that's too many moving parts for my poor brain
Yeah.
to talk about that also.
they go hand in hand with what Attorney Ancona is saying, I think, and if he wants to speak further of it in executive, that's, I guess I just wanted maybe a clarification, and that might be something I ask across the hall. If you make this change, do you even
Well,
make it worse
remember,
for development in our community.
It's not making a change, it's keeping a rule that's been there since 2011. The prohibition on overhead doors facing the street has been around since 2011, but it did not exist before 2011.
So if you now revert back to 2007.
You would not
what
have
would
the
be
overhead doors. That's
that-
one of the questions,
okay.
that's one of the things that,
So now you're making it even worse. You're taking a 2011 rule and ex-naying it.
well,
Papa.
that's why we have to
Okay.
talk about it in executive session.
Gotcha, okay.
Because the attorney's saying one thing and I'm
Okay,
saying
no,
something
that,
else.
I'm with you on that.
Commissioner Fox first,
Thank
you had your hand up, please.
My question, Judge, is practically answered, just had to do with the, whether we go to 100 feet, as you suggested, to stay at 50 feet. Going to 100 feet would, as Commissioner Woods stated at the last meeting, I believe, would preclude any auto-related uses in that open lot on the corner of Hartford Avenue and Main Street.
No,
No, it wouldn't because
no, it would not.
Is that,
That's already,
totally different.
if they
It's
come
already
back, they
zoned.
could,
Okay.
they come back, they could do it.
yeah, okay. But it would make a certain number of auto-related uses that are in existence now non-conforming.
No, it wouldn't. There are none
There are
that this
none.
would impact. That's,
Oh, okay.
as I said in my
All right.
memo, that was something that Ed Meehan researched
That's
back
why
in
I'm thinking
2010.
about
Yes.
increasing it, because
Yeah, that's right. That was
here's
a long
my
time ago.
rationale in increasing it. You have, from a speaker box to order a donut, you have to be 300 feet from a residence zone. But a guy can open the garage doors and start banging away on a tire with a sledgehammer, and that's only gonna be 50 feet or 100 feet. Doesn't make any sense. I mean, the distance requirements are all skewed all over the place. That's why when we get into everything beyond item number 1 on the next page, we should standardize some of this stuff. Commissioner Sobieski.
Yeah, that's, auto garage doors on facing the turnpike. I remember that when the DOT built that building, they could not do it. They had to go and put the doors sideways and put a berm in front of it, and that was well before 1999.
Yes,
That goes way back.
yeah.
I can't remember the exact year, but that goes way back when that had to be turned in Monroe Muffler.
Yeah,
So that's been in there for quite a while.
okay. Any other commissioner remarks? Commissioner Woods?
Yeah, a couple, I don't really have an issue with the doors facing the Berlin Turnpike. I think I've made it, so I'm not gonna go over it. I'm probably in the minority, but, I think we can handle it in different ways with buffering, whether it be landscape or fencing. But I do have a question on the distances on the next page, where it lists schools, playgrounds, hospitals, any residence. And I'm gonna use church as an example. In the last, I think, 3 or 4 meetings, will probably approved a couple of churches now being in commercial zones where there more than likely could be an automotive use next door. We're gonna start drastically limiting where they're gonna go. I mean, I don't think you would see a church on the Berlin Turnpike years ago in a commercial building. Now, we're more than likely gonna approve one, and there's one right across the street from it.
Mill Pond Church or something.
Yeah, Mill Pond Church. So I'm trying just to struggle with the rationale of it. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I get, Mr. Chairman, you said it already. You can't have one rule and make everybody happy. I do understand that. But I think if you increase the distance to 100 or back even further, 125, 150, I think personally what we're saying is that we don't want automotive uses in the town. Because it seems that when we start making it more restrictive, and when an applicant comes in, they don't meet it because of the weird shapes of property, and somehow it's touching a residential zone within the distance, that they don't meet the maximum. So,
Okay, we'll discuss it when we get into the balance here. Is there anything else on any other commissioner comments?
Just
On the first part, the auto regulation? Okay, seeing none, we gotta keep that portion open. We're gonna let Commissioner Payne come back in on this, on these items, with the distance requirements. Now we'll get into the distance requirements for, on the second page, BT zone, no parking, fast foods, heliports, adult education, alcoholic beverages. You want to take one at a time? Let's talk about the BT zone and other zones. No parking or loading shall be located within 20 feet of a residence zone. So there's, you got a requirement of 25 feet.
So
Commissioner
Mike,
Claffey.
and we're speaking of sub-item 2, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So my question on that is, it kind of fluctuates with where we have zoned some TOD areas in town, especially over in the West Hill area, Francis, Day Street, because it comes back to also the question of where you measure that 25 foot from. Do you measure from the corner of the lot line, which abuts the residential zone, but the loading dock is at the 400 feet the other side of the building? And I say that because there's a lot of activity over at across from the old welding site on Day Street, where the airplane, it's like an airplane type company in there that makes things that hold the engines. And recently they're doing a lot of construction at the project, but sometimes in the morning you'll go in there and there'll be 8 or 10 18-wheelers waiting to unload or load, and it's the next property of that, the next lot is a residential house. So the building itself is a couple 100 feet long in width, but there's mornings where you see 8, 10 trucks backed up on that street. And I think we got to look at it a little differently in the areas where the residential butts it. Literally, the next lot is a residential house. And I use that street because I travel a lot, and
Excuse me, Commissioner Claffey, you talking about Rossi's, the guy,
The
guy used to,
the steel building.
yeah, no, but
Next
the
to-
house was Ross Construction right next to
Before you
it.
get there, where there's some duplexes and stuff.
Yeah,
Oh, so it's just it's on the other end of Day Street.
yeah, one end of Day Street is residential homes, and then before the curve, you start that huge mechanical or manufacturing facility.
The old steel place?
Yeah, I think that's it, but now they run aircraft parts out of it. And there's a lot of activity over there, and they run a lot of equipment out of there, which is fine, but
So what do you suggest?
What-
we
what I'm
do-
saying
what-
is,
What do you
how
think
are
we
we-
should do as far as that's concerned? Where do you think we should take take the measurements from? We have to be consistent in how we do that, right, Mr. Planner?
and I guess that's odd, of like 25 feet. I mean, it's like from literally me to the door. I think but then we have somewhere where it's 300 feet for a fast food facility.
Can I help you?
Go ahead. I'm looking for communication, not just that's something I see as a concern I have.
Again, I think this one specifically talks to, and it doesn't say it here, but it's so that their commission can have a landscape buffer put in there. So it's a buffering between the residential property and the commercial property. So it's actually protecting the residents. So, and that, what you're using is a perfect example. There's more than enough room for them to give up 25 feet to build a berm there to protect the budding residences and the apartments that are then behind it.
Yeah,
Okay, to give them a buffer, and then still use their land and be in harmony with their neighbors,
But I guess what I'm reading that is it's just looking for, I guess the definition of separating distance, is it a use of a buffer, a separating distance, or?
Well, we talk about a buffer as the area, the 25-foot, minimum 25-foot wide area between the parking and loading and the residential zone boundary. Unfortunately, I think this regulation, for example, really only comes into play when the commission is reviewing a new site plan or a site plan modification. I doubt with an existing building that's been there for 50 years, it's had a succession of different industrial, commercial tenants, there's very possibly parking going on That's less than 25 feet from the property line, and I don't know at what point the TPC staff would even know about that, because businesses change all the time, and we don't know about them. Permitted uses.
Commissioner Payne?
No, you're right. Some businesses won't have that 25 feet until they redevelop their whole property, and then that 25 feet, as Commissioner Woods stated, would be used for a buffer system. And the buffer would not only be the land, but would be an area large enough for berming and possibly 2 rows of trees.
Yeah,
to-
landscape buffer.
Landscape buffer.
Right.
I think that it's hard to try to put a standard on everything because each situation is a little different. For instance, you can't compare the 25-foot buffer for the residential on the BBT to fast food intercoms, because the whole reason that came up was they felt that the intercom was interrupting and disturbing the residential property. So, I mean, the whole reason why the buffers are increased is to protect the residential property. And if you noticed, it's all, in the past, whenever we've gotten into trouble, it's because the activity is too close to residential property. And so that's why I think, and it's hard to, the adult entertainment is 1,000 feet. I mean, you're not gonna put everything at 1,000 feet. So, I mean, each situation is unique in its own way, I believe.
Any other comments from the commissioners? Maybe we're trying to recreate something that each individual section needs their own specific distance requirement. I don't know. Any comments on that? Commissioner Woods?
I do think that we probably need to really think hard on where we measure it from. I don't think we can just have it from a property line. I think that needs to be specific to the zone. And it can't be specific to each property because that doesn't work, but maybe we do it by the zone. I mean, the adult-oriented establishments at 1,000 feet, I mean, it's kind of like the marijuana thing. Basically what we're saying is it can't come here, although there was, well, I guess technically it wasn't one, right? The one that was in the old Jim Carty's building. Somehow that wasn't an adult entertainment, yet it was. But again, I think this town has pretty much proved it's not going to support that kind of business, and they're gone. I don't have a problem with that, but some of the other ones, it's not a problem. It becomes more difficult. The prime real estate is leaving, so we're looking for smaller pieces of property or more difficult pieces of property that come in here to get developed. And there always seems to be one little hang-up that our regulations keep us from moving forward on something that I think that we would probably like to do. And now there is no bending of any of these rules. So, this is a Bible that we can't change once it's established.
But I think, can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Using 5 as an example, you have it on the Berlin Turnpike, and you have 2 daycare centers with, I'm not gonna say within 1,000 feet, but pretty close to that last adult-oriented establishment that I knew was in town.
Actually, as I recall, it was not an adult-oriented establishment.
It wasn't, but technically it was. Well, that's what. Or technically it wasn't, but it was.
Yeah, legally, it wasn't. It didn't meet Newington's definition of adult-oriented establishment.
It's not there now, and it's for lease, but I bring that up because the building's for lease, and it's still, unless they change it, the occupancy could go back to that.
It was just a bookstore. As far as the zoning department is concerned, it was just a bookstore because it did not meet Newington's definition of adult oriented establishment.
The one that moved out?
Yeah,
Right.
Jim Carty's.
That was just
Right.
a bookstore.
It was
That's right.
just,
Okay,
yes.
no, okay, thank you for the. But it goes to also look at how you measured that. Like on this, in this, we're gonna measure it on the boundary, but on this.
Yeah, the property boundary, right.
Alcoholic beverages, we're gonna do it from the radius of the front door to the front door of each establishment. Like,
Yeah.
at what time do we start to try to hone in how we take a measurement? Like, that seems to be getting more confusing and why we can't come to an agreement.
Well, can I suggest that you guys have the big picture? You look at the zoning regulations and you notice that it seems like we're all over the place in how we define distances. But I suspect the person who wants to open a fast food restaurant in Newington couldn't care less what the other definitions of distance are. He just needs to know what he needs to do to get a permit to come into Newington. I don't think he loses sleep over how apparently inconsistent our distance definitions are or measurements are. As long as each one makes sense in its own context, I would suggest you move on to another item.
Okay.
And not try to make too much sense out of something which has evolved over time in response to maybe at the time unique circumstances, and just it's not an
But
exact
it seems
science.
like, but it does come into play when applicants sit here, use the marijuana. I mean, that we debated for, I don't know, 3 months, maybe? And we still couldn't get to figure it out.
Well, it got resolved and it got figured out.
But from the, okay. That's the problem. We just have an answer like, well, it got resolved. And we're still sitting here debating distances on businesses, right?
Well,
So
we're
what got
almost to the
resolved?
point where we're almost to a conclusion on that too. As far as debating it, I mean, it looks like that,
We've never answered Commissioner Wood's question of where we take a measurement
I
on a
think the-
property.
Oh, sure.
well, yeah, go ahead.
It
Mr.
depends.
Bryant.
Well, for example, for motor vehicle activities. Okay, entrances. Okay, okay, that one, as I say, no place of measurement is stated, but when we had one a few years ago, Firestone, and I reviewed the plans to make sure they complied. Where am I going with this? I don't remember what I did. I mean, I'm sure I measured it in some way, and I'm sure, so I could come before you and say, yes, it meets your regulations.
It's from the property line to the zone.
Well, that's usually the same thing. The property line is often the zone boundary.
Well, take
not
the
necessarily.
marijuana. The property line that abutted Prospect was X feet wide, and we didn't use that in our determination. but
Okay, in
by
this
law, we
case,
should
I
have.
would probably I would take the center line of the driveway, of the entrance, and measure from there, or maybe maybe more conservative, the side of the proposed entrance, measure how far that is to the property boundary of the church next door. And if that property boundary of the church next door is less than 100 feet, then there's a problem. The applicant's going to have to move his driveway further away so that the driveway is at least 100 feet from the property line of the church next door. That's,
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Maybe in the future, we could talk about this a little bit more. I think, I think that there is a little bit of work. For instance, on number 4, helipad facility, 300-foot radius from any residential structure. Well, we've got 300 feet for a speaker for an intercom. I think for a helicopter landing next to my house at 300 feet, I think that I think the 300 feet might be off, okay? So, I mean, that's one that sticks out.
There's some that stick out here that,
But my point was that maybe we're getting a lot more involved in this and brings up a lot of other things, and maybe
Why
it
don't you
should
put
be
it on the
kept.
agenda for a separate item to go over these, not in conjunction with the auto regulation. So take it up as a second. Does that satisfy everybody? We take it up again, but under a different, okay, good.
so are we moving on
Yes.
to the next one? Okay, because in your packet, I did have a draft text amendment, which summarizes, well, which then presents what the regs would look like if you went back to 2007, but kept,
Now we're
The
talking
over-
about auto. I gotta recuse myself. If you're gonna talk about auto again.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I would like you to, so that we could get some closure to this.
Okay, so what, on this, until we have the executive session, I would not, we'll put this off until the
Okay.
next meeting,
All right.
okay? And then that would answer, that might answer some of the questions.
Yeah, draft motion.
Sorry, Commissioner.
Okay, so you're putting it back on the agenda. Okay, we'll go on to the next item, Newington Ridge Preserve. Mr. Planner.
Right. Actually, I put that on the agenda because it's a standing item, and I always want it on the agenda so that if anything happens, that the commission can talk about it. And, sorry, let me just get the agenda back on the screen there for folks. Okay. I think it was, yes, it was before your last meeting, the developer did go out and pave the road. And a couple of days ago, we got a request from the developer for a bond release, which I'm not prepared to discuss tonight because that just came in 2 days ago. So that'll be on your agenda next month to discuss his request for a bond release. So I don't have anything to report per se on Newington Ridge, unless, well, I have anything else to report other than that.
Any commissioner comments or questions on Newington Ridge?
And correct me and tell me you'll discuss it at the next meeting. Did the reports come back on the boring tests for the subgrade and the town engineer look at that?
Well,
The
let me,
last communication I saw is that there wasn't any that there was claimed to be, but.
let me, I don't remember because it's been a month since I thought about that specific item. So let me just have a complete report for you next time. Yep.
Okay, any other questions on that? No, there's no old business, Mr. Planner?
Just the Callahan accessory apartment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that'll be a couple hours.
Okay, okay, can I get a motion, please, Mr. Vice Chairman?
Motion, petition 53-18, special permit, section 6.13, accessory apartment at 99 Cedarwood Lane. Paul C.F. Ferry, trustee. Callahan, qualified personnel residence trust, owner. Attorney John M. Kelly, 66 Cedar Street, Suite 208, Newington, Connecticut, contact. I move to approve with conditions. Petition 53-18, special permit, section 6.13, accessory apartment at 99 Cedarwood Lane, Paul C. Ferry, trustee, Callahan Qualified Personnel Residence Trust, owner, attorney, John M. Kelly, 66 Cedar Street, 208, Newington, Connecticut, contact. Conditions, none.
Second.
Motion made, second. Any questions, comments on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, you're all set.
Okay, just to clarify, what Mr. Camillo read was my draft, which had the words "with conditions" in brackets, so that if the commissioners had conditions, they could say so, but I did not hear any conditions, so this was approved with no
He
conditions.
actually ended it with no conditions.
Yep.
Okay, you're all set. Old business. I'm gonna go over, let's do the, executive session at the end so the public can weigh in, and then we'll just move that item.
Okay.
Okay, petitions for, public hearing scheduling, you got the church.
Right, for your next meeting, let's see, that would be, petition 1-19, special permit, section 3.2.1, churches and places of worship at 2172 Berlin Turnpike, Lifeway Church applicant, Berlin Turnpike of Newington LLC owner, Gary Weber, 220 Sunrise Avenue, Newington, Connecticut, contact.
Okay, we're gonna put it on for the next meeting. Any questions? Okay, you're all set. Town planner report.
Okay, the first item is the plan of conservation and development. At I think 2 meetings ago, I gave the commission my draft request for proposals, which is sort of an outline of how the update process will work, but it's detailed instructions for the consultant that the town hires to do this. So I wanted it on the agenda for the commissioners to discuss so that we're all on the same page as to what skill set we're looking for in the consultant, what we're going to expect the consultant to do as part of the POCD update process.
Okay, what are you looking for us to do?
Let me know if there's anything in there that you don't like. Let me know if there's anything you think is missing.
Thank you.
Any, you've had this, you look at it, do you want more time, what do you want to do? Mr. Woods?
Yeah, no, actually, I read the whole thing. I think it's well-written. I think it's actually what we're looking for. It might not necessarily be what we buy in the end, but I think it's what we need to put out there. And then we can decide when we sit with a consultant in the end, exactly, what charges we want to give them. But I think this is a very broad overall.
That's a good point. It's also possible the amount of money that we've budgeted might not, in fact, be able to buy everything that I want. So your point's well taken, Commissioner.
Okay, that's the same conclusion I came to after I read it. It's pretty boilerplate. Okay, go ahead. Go with it.
Okay.
I have
That-
one question.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll hold it till the next meeting. Sorry.
Okay, anything else?
On that, no.
Okay, motels on the Berlin Turnpike.
Okay, at the last meeting, and then I think the meeting before that even, the commissioners raised the issue of people that are living for extended periods in the motels, mostly on the Berlin Turnpike, but possibly elsewhere in town. And so I was asked to do some research into it, which I did some, and I prepared a memo for the commissioners. In summary, it's a complicated issue, as you would probably imagine. And in my memo, I point out that part of the problem with enforcing this rule is the definition of motel and hotel and the efficiency unit. So that's in my report. You can read that, and we can discuss that. But another issue was brought to my attention, which I hadn't thought of in this context. As most people know, whenever the government displaces people from where they're living usually through the building inspector or through the fire marshal, the town is then responsible for finding accommodations for them and paying their rent where they're temporarily displaced at. I hadn't thought of that in the zoning context, but just as if the fire marshal evicts people because there's been a fire, or if the building inspector evicts people because the building is structurally unsafe, that same law probably would apply to a zoning enforcement officer. So it's a complicated issue.
Commissioner comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, a lot of those hotels up there, people are placed in there by the state, and, whether it's Section 8 or whatever it's called. And, I believe there's a statute on the books, I don't have the number in front of me, maybe the town attorney has it, that anything over 3 families has to be eligible for Section 8 housing. So I think if the state's putting people in there, this could open up a huge can of worms. It's not only in Newington, it's all over the place, because there's not enough apartments that they can get. Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments? The point being, Stanley, what?
Well, the point being is that if somebody is located in there, the Section 8 housing usually applies in 2 ways. Either it's applied to the building itself, or it's applied to the family that goes there.
These do not comply then?
I'm sorry?
The motels and hotels don't comply to that, right? Or they do?
I believe they do. That's what I'm asking. I don't know. You have to look and see what the state Section 8 is.
And that's why I've been bringing this up, because I'm trying to figure out how, if that is true, how we're allowing Section 8, which is for apartments, to be funded through a hotel or motel. And that's something I think off what he's asking, maybe I'm not seeing it right.
Commissioner Woods?
I think it allows it as temporary housing. I don't think you would see the state funding it as permanent housing for Section 8. So they might get a voucher for limited amount of time to be in these different types of hotels and motels we have on the territory, but not permanent, I believe it would be. And because that voucher then goes with a resident, not the structure. So it's the resident that has the voucher, who happens to live there.
I'm gonna ask the attorney to come forward. He might have some information to shed some light on this. Go ahead.
Just for clarity, Commissioner Woods has it right. The voucher is actually owned or possessed by the tenant himself. And it goes with him wherever he goes. And the building itself has to conform to minimum federal housing guide requirements. They're not very strict. It depends on who oversees it. Imagineers is probably the most strict. And then you get to the individual housing authorities throughout the state. And it depends on the inspector. But you can use that voucher and you could live there for 20 years.
And there is a yearly inspection, though, too, with that voucher.
Yes,
So
there
if
is.
there's an application, that voucher is only good for, if it's a permanent residence, only 1 year, and it gets renewed every single year. There's an inspection of the property on a yearly basis.
Right, but they won't look at zoning issues. They just
Right.
don't.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner,
I think what is going on here is we've ignored the regulations over here on a few of these hotels and for a long period of time, and it's detrimental to the town and the quality of life. If a hotel is changing their occupancy to an apartment, but not complying with the regulations, zoning, and building codes, then they're in violation and it has to be corrected, and we need consistency. And it's also leading to other problems that are tying our police force up. And I think this situation has to be addressed by the town, and it's got to be addressed immediately.
And I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
yeah, go ahead.
That would require an 812 action, which we do all the time. We do these actions all the time. You go into court, you ask a judge, hey, they're not complying with our zoning regs or our blight regs, and we need an order. We've got people in, I don't want to pick on anybody, but one that I dealt with was Grantmore, where you had somebody living there with hot plates, and it was a permanent residence. There's no denying it. And the relocation statute, which you were addressing, I may be in the minority in this, with municipal attorneys, but when your lease is week to week or month to month, I think the town's obligation only extends to that lease period. So I have said in the past that if relocation is required, the relocation would only be for the period remaining in the lease term.
Oh, that's interesting.
This, the situation puts an extreme burden on our police department. I believe that they're putting in a lot of overtime and they're at these hotels, and the two issues kind of tie together a little bit. They're two separate issues. Are they complying with zoning and building codes for what they were originally supposed to? And because we're not enforcing that, it's causing other problems for the police department, and it's tying up their time a lot in town. And I think it has to be looked at. And if it's a matter of a team of people in Newington to look at it, then it is what it is. I think the town attorney could help in this matter. Thank you.
We have, I know of one that's even right on their sign is advertising as efficiency apartments. Efficiency apartments. It's a motel. And it's right on their sign. And we've all seen it. We know which one it is. Commissioner Woods.
Does the fire marshal have a role in this? Does he do inspections of the establishments to make sure that they're safe?
Yeah,
I would think,
apparently
yes.
he does, but there hasn't been any actions against, there hasn't been any, I haven't heard of any actions because of his inspections, have you?
Well, that's my point. So is he deeming these structures safe? With hot plates, with whatever cooking?
We did have that situation with the Grantmore, but it was, I guess, instituted by the health department. those are the ones that went in. And what happens, the next step from there is we bring in the prosecuting, the state's attorney's office, and which is nice because we don't use our resources. It's nice when when the prosecutor comes in and threatens and brings them into court, but there's a lot going on, and the resources are pretty limited. So I'm not sure what the answer is. And you also have the other situation where they claim that, oh, well, they check out at 11 every day and they just check in at 3. I mean, it's tough.
Is it, to help us, is it worth drafting a memo to the chief clerk and getting his input on this?
There's a task force of town staff that are dealing with issues, including this, and he's on that committee. Yeah. So
what
I
are they
can
dealing
approach him
with?
and ask, what's that?
So they're already dealing with this, and we're not, are we in that task force?
Yes. Yes, your predecessor was.
Yes, and I've started to become involved in those meetings.
So what is our involvement? What are we doing? Like, I guess that's news to me that there's a task force, because I've asked some local.
I think they're at a
law-
standstill because they're worried about the law of having to replace these people somewhere else, put them somewhere else.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yeah,
One way of going about it might be with our blight ordinance. And getting the numbers from Chief Clark would really be helpful. How many calls are there in a given month, 6-month period, a year at any particular motel or property? And then you use that to initiate a blight action.
Mr. Chairman, is there anything else on our books or the state's books that if a property is extremely burdening the police department with prostitution, drug trafficking, all the list of everything, and it's continuing and continuing, what is
That's
what is
exactly what I'm talking
That's
about.
exactly what you're talking about. That,
Yes.
okay.
So when you say blight, I have to ask another question, because when I brought that word up, they say, well, it's not us, it's not zoning. So is it legally separate from this commission?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Is there a role that the ZEO then
Well, the
plays as
ZEO has dual roles.
No, that's what I'm saying is, it seems, and I've asked this, why they're not together, because blight and zoning, as much as everyone wants to tell me I'm wrong, they run hand in hand at times.
I can see how.
We never seem to commingle, like, oh, I'm running a blight here, but, well, there's violations there for zoning, and then they never kind of come together, even though
Right.
some properties have both.
It's true, but statutorily, they really are different animals.
Okay.
Yep.
And there's no way to bring them,
No, because you are an odd commission because you have special statutory powers
okay.
and regulatory powers.
Yep.
Commissioner Fox.
Yeah, well, through the commissioner, the chairman had mentioned a couple of these, the motels that actually advertise efficiencies. We don't allow efficiencies. Now, is that something that the ZEO can get into, or, or what, or a prosecutor? I mean, they're out there blatantly advertising something that is against our regulations.
Well, I don't know who brought up fire marshal, but I think that is right up the fire marshal's alley.
Yeah.
But we probably could, yes. If somebody's blatantly admitting to the world that they're conducting a zoning violation, yeah, that we could act on that.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
have we asked the building department how they oversee their inspections on, or is it back to the fire marshal on the yearly, if any, inspections on occupancies? Because the building department seems to deal with the occupancy, and that's where this problem is stemming from, they're approved for an occupancy of a hotel motel, and then they get their approvals, or they've had their approvals for years and years, and it seems like we don't use that in our legal fight. Even though they first came in to get your approval for occupancy, you gotta go to the building department and say, I wanna occupy this structure. Then they come to us and we say, yes, you can do it at that lot. I mean, the newest hotel we have is the Holiday Inn Express, I think, or whatever that one is, and from the people I've talked to, that's probably one that's not been flipped into this efficiency from the people that know it well that I've discussed this with. It's one of the few that still is the typical out at 11, in at 3, and different people.
Yeah, do you want me to ask the building inspector to come to a meeting and explain, because I don't know.
Yeah,
That's a good
I
question.
don't, is there a
How-
way this
Does he have an
all-
inspection?
I don't know if there's,
Fire marshal.
I don't,
I think the fire
Is it the
marshal
fire
is supposed to be doing a yearly inspection on properties.
but what I'm getting at is back to the definition. In an occupancy, it's defined by sometimes the building code. In our regulation, it states, or you had written.
well, we all have different definitions. That's part of the problem. The zoning has one definition, the building department will have a
Oh,
different
but
one, the fire
there
marshal will
was-
have a
You
third.
use language like, or there is, in addition to building code requirements. That's the language we have, I think, in our regulation. So first they have to meet that, and also meet that with our zoning regs.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's written in 3.1. I mean, in addition to that, you have to meet all these other things for us. Was it not in 3.14? Or it was in the beginning of the, when our zoning law talks about possibly occupancy, you have to meet all that. I wrote it here, it's in here. 3.14.
Right, it doesn't appear to be in the definitions, which I reproduced in this memo. But that phrase that you're remembering may be somewhere else in the zoning regs.
When I find it, and if I find it, I'll send it to you in email.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so where do we go from here on this?
Maybe we could just be updated once in a while on what the task force is doing,
Okay.
I guess. You know, maybe in the next 3 months, or if, you know, give the task force a chance to meet and hopefully take care of this problem, and instead of ignoring it. I think that,
How long has this task force been in existence?
Oh, a couple of years, I think.
Exactly.
It's a huge problem.
You know, this typical government, when you don't know what to do with it, make a committee, put some people on it and forget about it, put it on the shelf someplace. And that's what happens here, and that's what happens all the time in government. It's ridiculous. It really is. They've been meeting for 2 years, and we're talking about it now, and we don't even know that there was a task force. Okay, please. Okay. So where do we go from here? We're gonna leave this on the,
leave it on the agenda.
why don't you put it on the agenda
Like
a
Newington Ridge.
month from now, okay?
Oh,
Can you
okay.
remember that?
Yeah, make a note here, next month.
What, next item, kindness counts.
All right, hang on a second, let me make a note
What's
here.
that mean?
Yeah.
Be kind to the commissioners.
No. The Newington Parks and Rec Department has come up with an idea for a program that they're calling Kindness Counts. And I gave you, when you arrived tonight, a copy of their template. Under their program, people that, I'll simplify it, although it seems pretty simple. People that do kind things will be recognized for having done that by having a nice little sign put on the front yard by the Parks and Rec Department that something kind was done by the person who lives in this house. And I just wanted to make you aware that this is a program that the Parks and Rec Department is embarking on. And I just wanted to make you aware of it.
Tell them how they're gonna do that when it doesn't meet the sign requirements for zoning. So tell them it's ill-conceived, it's ill-conceived. We're gonna have these signs on all over the place, these paper signs. We just went through a revision of our zoning regulation on signs to eliminate this. In our own town, the park department is thinking about putting these signs on people's property. Doesn't make sense. All right, the commissioners, you wanna weigh in on this? You have a different thought? You
No,
think it's a good idea, then let's.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. We can't have these signs popping up all over the place. I think that Park and Rec is gonna have to rethink this.
Unless they want to put it on their sign that they own in the center of town that no one else can use but them, they could put whatever they want on it. Why don't they do that? And have their kindness thing on their sign that no one else can use. Mr. Woods?
Yeah, I think it's a short-lived program.
I don't think it's gonna go on forever. This is not something that's gonna go on for 18 months or a year. The signs will be up, I think it's.
I think it's 3 months,
Yeah, is it,
two, 2 months.
but it's going to be, not thousands of signs tomorrow. It's gonna take as the acts come on. So you need to do an act, then they're gonna, have somebody come out and put up the sign. And then that sign will be taken down. So it's not gonna be unlike the extravaganza when you see the signs all over town.
Those are illegal too.
If we're,
And the ones from the school where they're putting the plays on, and those are all illegal signs. We've defined it in our regulation. We debated signs for years. When Carol was on the commission, how many years ago, we had a sign committee, and she was on it. And it's been years, we've debated this.
I hear you, but I mean, I'll go back to, God, I think is it the 70s or early 80s with the yellow ribbon around the trees. I'm not quite sure how you stop something like that. I'm not so sure that you would want to stop something like that. This is a good thing, and maybe it'll flop. Maybe there's only going to be 10 or 15 signs. I doubt it though, because I think this is a community of volunteers, and I think it's going to send a message, and that's what I think it's looking to do, is that people get involved in their community to make it a better place. It's a positive thing, not a negative thing. I don't think you're going to see them strewn all over the place. I think they're going to be up like a
That sets a
residential home
precedent for
sale.
other people saying, well, they could do it, why can't we do it? Why can't the Girl Scouts have their cookie drive signs all over the town?
They do.
And they never take them down, and
They do.
They're flying across my lawn and on Church Street. I mean, I don't know, we went back and forth with this sign regulation, we came to a conclusion, and now we're making exceptions to it. If you wanna do that, then let's do it as a commission with a vote.
we didn't, Mr. Chairman, we didn't even have him come in. He never even came in to ask us permission for this, or tell us how long the signs are gonna be up, or how big they are, or anything. He just assumed that he can just put up a sign anywhere he wants. I mean, we gotta have some consistency, otherwise we're gonna have, all the school, programs, everybody else is gonna be doing this. We have a sign, electronic sign at the school department. You could put the person's name on that. You could put it on the signs that you were talking about. There's, I think 3 or 4 of those that they could be used, which still achieves what he wants to achieve, okay? And then this commission, in the past, recommended having additional ones of those signs, especially since we can't use any of them.
I don't know, you want, put it on the agenda, we'll take a vote on it. I don't know what else to do.
Well,
Deadly against it, I don't even wanna start it.
Is he as I understand it, he's informing us. He's not asking our permission. Is that
well,
correct?
he asked me to put it on, to bring it to the commission's attention.
Okay.
It doesn't, he's not asking for your approval, but it's an issue that the commission needs to be aware of. And if it's something that the commission feels strongly is a bad thing, then I'll convey that to Mr. DeMayo.
There's other options for him, he could use his own signs.
Well, they would be, what do you mean, his own signs?
He has signs in the center of town, billboards, that he could, that the Park and Rec uses could own, as exclusive right to use. And they
Mr.
put
Chairman.
their programs on, and they could use that as their,
Mr. Chairman, that's not gonna work. Those signs are very effective, and they're rented out throughout or actually, they're given out.
they're rented
There's never
out.
any space.
They
No.
gotta,
They're rented sometimes, and sometimes they're given, but but they're always full. You have to book it way in advance.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, the commission doesn't need to do anything about this program. If the Parks and Rec Department were to embark on it and the signs start showing up around town, the CEO would either take action or he wouldn't, depending on what other things he's doing that day, other sign issues he's working on. It doesn't require action on your part.
That would play very nice. They're gonna go ahead and put them up, and we're gonna have a zoning enforcement officer take them down. I'd like to see that article in the paper.
Well, this brings up, I hate to say it, but it brings up, I'm still seeing the signs that are hanging at Cleveland the park. And this gets back to what we talked about.
Well, that's
year ago.
different. You don't have jurisdiction over those, you don't have jurisdiction over those bed sheets. You don't.
I'm not talking about the bed sheets. I'm
Oh.
talking the park and rec where they sell out a spot for the private lacrosse league that uses their facilities. And they got signs in downtown, big yellow billboard sign right next to the cakery on that billboard there.
Oh, the community bulletin board, which
It's the
Parks
community-
and Rec seems to have control
That's
of,
the- well,
right?
I mean, I was against temporary signs.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's got to be on the agenda at a later date, and he's got to come in and explain to us. And we can't let this happen and then try to enforce it with zoning. I agree with Commissioner Woods. That would be a nightmare.
All right, I was too obtuse. My point is, it doesn't have to be enforced. It would be enforced at the discretion of the CEO, and he will.
Well, so
If
we're
I
not
were the
going
CEO, I
to,
might
so what are we
be-
going to do? We're not going to enforce our regulations consistently? It'll be depending on somebody's opinion or who it is and who's doing the sign, who's got the sign out? Is that how we're going to operate? No consistency?
You always have the right to decide which issues you want to bring the full weight of the town's zoning enforcement powers behind, and which issues you don't. That's always the commission's prerogative.
There is an option that we get behind it and embrace it and support it and issue them a permit for 60 days to put up these signs across town.
It took 2 years just to get to the temp sign ordinance.
Maybe we would support it if we had more information. He hasn't even come in to say, hey, this is what I would like to do. He's just assuming he's going to do whatever he wants to do.
Well, no, in fairness, Mr. DeMaio, he approached me. He asked me to bring it to the commission.
But we got no details.
Well, you have the template sample pulpit speech or letter for the Eureka Bulletin, but your point's well taken that you would like him to come before you and explain the program. All right, I will let him know that, and I will suggest that he come to your next meeting. Is that the commission's
Yes.
wish? Okay. All right, I'll tell him.
They should think about whether they wanted to allow this to happen. If they do, then fine, but then be prepared that you're gonna get backlash from it. You're setting a precedent for other people. There's gonna be, if you're not gonna be consistent with the regulation, then don't have a regulation at all. We're making exceptions to something that took years to accomplish. We're trying already to make exceptions to it. Okay.
Okay, that's all I have.
Communications, any communications? Commissioner Sobieski?
Yes, I just sent out the CROG update on up today, so everybody should have it. If you don't get it, please let me know.
Any other communications? No? Public participation, anyone from the public wishing to speak?
Gail Vidrico, 21 Isabel Terrace. I'm seeing both sides of this sign issue. And I agree with Commissioner Woods in terms of, let's get behind it and endorse it, whatever, the spirit of it. But I also agree that having one town department violates some zoning rules, even though they're exempt, is not really in the spirit of working together as a town. What I would like to see is, I'd like to see the program implemented and instituted, but maybe, we can bring to them other ideas, or there may be other ways to recognize the individual. So I think it's a great idea, but let's keep it consistent with our zoning regulations, but let's get behind it, but offer alternatives. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Gail. That's good thought.
Rose Lyons, 46 Elton Drive. I agree with what Gail just said. I also would like to find out the difference between you not having any control over the design of the Parks and Rec signs in the center of town because they didn't want to change it to conform with Administrative Letter 35. You don't have anything to do with it. Well, maybe I should be contacting the town manager and asking her why it's not conforming. And yet, they can just tell you that they're going to go start putting signs around town. I sat here for I don't know how many years listening to you all go back and forth over the signs and more signs. I think it's a little bit presumptuous of Mr. DeMayo to just tell you what he's going to do without coming in front of you. Whether you have any control over it, I don't know. Does it make a difference because he's going to put it on private property and it's not on town property? Not my call, but just hearing it, I like the spirit, I like the idea. But just a month or so ago, I sat at a town council meeting where they recognized 4 people for their volunteerism and what they did. There's other ways to do it.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rose. Anyone else? John?
John Kelly, 293 Maple Hill Avenue in Newington. You know, I was listening to the discussion about the motels, and, you know, this commission, you know, I